All right. Hey y'all, I'm really happy and pretty excited to be here for my first longer form YouTube level video. The Instagram thing is pretty short and sweet, it seems like, so when I have more to say, now there's a place for me to put those things, like in-depth reviews like I'm gonna do today, or um, maybe like reading favorite passages and stuff like that. But today, it's Starship Troopers um, by Robert Heinlein. Okay, so just a quick overview of the plot of Starship Troopers. The story is there's this kid, he's finishing high school in the beginning of the story, and his name's Johnny Rico. His best friend, uh, Carl, tells him when they're getting ready to graduate that he's going to sign up for federal service or military service after high school instead of going straight to college. And that kind of strikes Johnny, and he decides he's going to do the same thing. This all tees off some conversation, first, that comes from a class he's taking in high school called History and Moral Philosophy. Also, he tells his dad he's going to join the military, and his dad is against it. So Johnny signs up. Um, his friend Carl goes into one section. He signs up for the military infantry. He goes away to basic training. It's called Camp Curry, and he does the basic training thing there. Sergeants yelling at him. He kind of goes through a personal transformation there and becomes a soldier. Let's say he gets done at Camp Curry. He ends up, in a unit. I think his first unit is called Rasnick's Roughnecks, and they deploy. He goes into combat, and now he is straight up a soldier. He spends some time with this unit, and more characters are introduced. Eventually, he applies for officer school. When he's in officer school, he takes again a class called History and Moral Philosophy. And that's really important in the book, what's discussed in those classes. Eventually, he goes into combat again in a role training to become an officer. He's fighting in what's called the Bug Wars. The Federation or humanity is fighting against a race of bugs, communistic hive mind bugs out in space. And it's a war for domination, it's a war for survival. It does echo the Cold War for sure, for me. Then, moving off from being in that last combat drop of the book, the novel concludes. I won't say the exact ending, but so that's kind of the story in a nutshell. Well, my initial reaction when I was reading the book, I was surprised that I was enjoying it because it is very like military fiction, ranks and military order and anyway, all of this militaristic stuff. And also, it seemed from early on that the book was sort of building a case for violence and for militarism and for warfare, which is uncomfortable. And if that was done on purpose, then that's brilliant. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think the book kind of critiques those things as much as it builds a case for them. By the end of the novel, it seems like it is making a case for essentially a military state. Ugh. Um, but I have to wonder: is it making that argument, or is it creating a discussion on human nature? Is it creating a discussion on systems of power? I think it could be read as satirical or as critical of systems of power, like I said. So, and I'll get into more of that. I think there's also room to see how it critiques how people are indoctrinated toward militarism, toward nationalism, and things like that. Violence on behalf of the state. Yes, on behalf of the sovereign franchise, which becomes a really pivotal idea in the book. I brought up that history and moral philosophy class. So early in the book, in the context of that class, the question comes up, what has violence ever solved? Or violence never solves anything. The teacher of that class does not buy that. He sort of punishes a student in a way for saying that and says, quote, violence, naked force has settled more issues in history than has any other factor. Breeds that forget this basic truth have always paid for it with their lives and freedom. You know what I mean? The person speaking, the character speaking, his name is Mr. Dubois, later revealed to be Lieutenant Colonel Dubois. That is significant because in the book it's revealed that in this world, in this federation, only veterans of military service are franchised, have the right to vote, have the right to have a say in how the state runs. That is sort of a central issue being discussed throughout the whole book, is who gets the sovereign franchise. The answer in this book is veterans of the military. And it builds a case for that, or critiques by building a case for that. I guess that's kind of up to how you read it. The next thing that's significant in the book that I want to talk about, I'm calling citizen or franchised. Like I was just saying, the only people in the book it's revealed who are citizens in the sense of voting, have a say, can hold government office, are veterans of the military. It's kind of a mystery, though, in the beginning, at least it was to me, what this being a citizen and being franchised, like what the significance of that was. So I learned about sort of, I already was familiar with the idea, but at least the phrase sovereign franchise. Who gets to participate in systems of power, who's excluded from systems of power, and how is that power passed down from one generation to the next. That's what's meant by sovereign franchise, so that makes the book really interesting to me, thinking about how that seems to work. In the moral and history philosophy class, this quote is said in discussion of this system and who's a citizen, who's franchised. Mr. Dubois says in class, the practical reason for continuing our system is the same as the practical reason for continuing anything. It works satisfactorily. Throughout the story, Johnny is having memories of things that were discussed in this class. I guess the ideas are being tested out in the real world for him and are finding a place to settle in his world. So let's see, Mr. Dubois is discussing the system, the sovereign franchise. He gives historic examples of attempts by humanity to place the sovereign franchise in hands that would guard it well and use it wisely for the benefit of all. Starts with absolute monarchy. He continues to democracy, which in reference to our own democracy now, which is in their past. In the novel takes place in the future. He references 20th century democracies and says that even we, always exclude a section of the population from the franchise, which is true in America. There are still categories and sections of people that are denied the vote. And that's been even more pronounced in American history, So like I said, throughout the book, Johnny is sort of remembering discussions that were had in this moral and history and moral philosophy class, and so when he's in basic training, he gets a letter from Mr. Dubois, and the letter, I think, opens up this discussion of moral value, or sort of the definition of value, the idea of what is valuable, what should be held valuable, I think. And I think this letter makes clear what is meant by history and moral philosophy and what that whole program is all about. Which, not for nothing, let's note, it's being taught in school. It's a form of indoctrination, is what it is, in the world of this book. So, in this letter, Mr. Dubois says to Johnny, the noblest fate a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and the war's desolation. Mr. Dubois in class argues that morality is rooted in evolution and is rooted in the survival instinct. He basically is saying, not basically, he explicitly says, this is in page 94 to 95 of this edition. He explicitly says, man has no moral instinct. He is not born with a moral sense. We acquire moral sense when we do through training, experience, and hard sweat of the mind. The instinct to survive can be cultivated into motivations more subtle and much more complex than the blind, brute urge of an individual to stay alive. What you call moral instinct was the instilling in you by your elders of the truth that survival can have stronger imperatives than that of your own personal survival. Family, nation. A scientifically verifiable theory of morals must be rooted in the individual's instinct to survive and nowhere else. The basis of all morality is duty, a concept with the same relation to the group that self-interest has to individual. I think the history and moral philosophy class, the whole novel is building an argument for a framework for morality, and that's it right there. Evolutionary based, the survival instinct just gets elevated or expanded to these sort of higher order things like a nation, like the state. That's kind of put at the top of the hierarchy here. There's a discussion of value and what value means that I found really interesting in the context of the class. Mr. Dubois is talking about use and cost as ways to define value. He deconstructs the Marxist value theory, which what he's referencing is the socially necessary labor time theory in Marxism, which basically says like how long it takes on average to produce a thing is directly is the thing that decides the value of that thing. The novel deconstructs that and then uses this example of a chef of a kitchen, and you could have some very basic food materials, and someone unskilled could come up, spend X amount of time with them, and actually lower their value, could turn what was edible raw ingredients into something inedible and unpleasant. Meanwhile, someone with great skill could show up to those ingredients and turn them into something of greater value than they were in the raw form, and could do it, easily. So that's sort of how he argues against the Marxist definition of value. I think there's a great discussion to be had there that I've really only just touched the surface of myself. But it was really interesting how he goes on to define use and cost, and it builds to something. So use is what you could do with the thing, and cost is what you have to do to get it, and the two of them define value. He also says value is something personal. It's personal to everyone. There is no objective reality when it comes to value. And he uses that assertion to say that only military veterans should be franchised, be empowered, because they're the only ones whose personal relationship to value is worthy of leadership. Basically, he says that, let me read this here for you, please. He says, nothing in life is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. A prize you haven't earned may feel worthless. The best things in life must be purchased other than with money, or beyond money. Price is agony and sweat and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things in life is life itself, the ultimate cost for the ultimate value. So I think the book basically is arguing that only a veteran of the military has put their life on the line to a high enough degree and for the sake of the state. And I'll get into a little bit more of this later, but they're the only ones who have essentially paid or risked high enough of a cost to make good use of the power of the state. It's fucking it's crazy, but very, very interesting. Throughout the book, in the soldiering sense and people dying, the narrator says a lot that, oh, this guy bought it, or that guy bought the farm, or buy your piece, or buy a piece of the farm. And that buy the farm, this idea of cost. And I think it's being played with in that with that language as well, and ultimate cost, you know. Okay, I want to talk now about moral virtue in the novel. The novel equates it with social responsibility. And the quote I want to read now kind of reiterates what I was just saying. But, quote, since sovereign franchise is the ultimate in human authority, we ensure that all who wield it accept the ultimate in social responsibility. We require that each person who wishes to exert control over the state to wager his own life, and lose it if need be, to save the life of the state. Yeah, like I was saying, the whole turn of phrase, this guy bought the farm. It's reinforcing that idea of buying the existence of the state, and it's the life of the state that is of ultimate importance. Yeah, that's not something that really seems groovy to me. But it is fascinating that the novel is making this argument and raising all these questions. You know. Okay, so that's really kind of the heady stuff from the novel, and there's so much more, I'm sure. Whoops, I had to cut back in here because I forgot to say something. As far as I don't think I ever in the video make a case for how this might be a critique and not in support of militarism. But there's a passage where Johnny, he gets to go on leave for the first time while he's at basic training, and the quote that I took was, as he gets out into the civilian world now after being in basic for so long, he says, "It all seemed amazingly complex and unbelievably untidy. I stood around and gawked at the display windows filled with all manner of unnecessary things, and not a weapon among them." The takeaway I had there is that someone's world has to be, in some way, maybe simple and tidy in order for killing on behalf of the state to kind of, for that logic to hold up, let's say. That's the kind of world that logic can live in. Now, maybe that's debatable. That's was an idea that came to me as I was reading this. And I felt like the way that there's a passage right after that where he's saying like everyone seemed like to just be walking around doing whatever they want, you know, in the free world. And it seemed like this one passage was creating a juxtaposition between military life and free world living. And in that way, I thought, oh, you know, maybe this really is more satirical than I was thinking. But there were a few other things I wanted to just share with you, like moments that I found touching or particularly interesting. Well, there's definitely moments where characters die, and the feeling of grief and loss was tangible, and the novel did a great job, I think, of letting me feel like, not sugarcoating that kind of stuff. So in line with the case that the novel seems to be building, the character, Johnny, is also going through this personal transformation, I feel like. You know, he starts as this high school kid, and by the end of it, he's a straight up hardcore soldier, military officer, and seems to be a believer in this system. The pivotal turning point, I think, for me, for the character Johnny, was in basic training at Camp Curry. And by the way, all of the names of ships, the names of Camp Curry, they're all references to figures in military history. But Camp Curry, I think, echoing probably how real life boot camp is, it is supposed to be this transformative time, and it's supposed to weed out anyone who's not going to find it within themselves, find something within themselves. The novel actually talks about, in the letter that Johnny gets from Mr. Dubois when he's in basic, it talks about this transformation and how Johnny's kind of gone through the worst of it psychologically. He got over the hill that everyone has to get over, and now he's basically untouchable because he's earned something in himself through his pain and suffering in basic that no one can take away. You know, that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's some truth to that idea, but for the sake of and in the context of service to the state, you know, I don't think that's such a wonderful idea, personally. But it was interesting, and it was cool to see him make this psychological internal progression toward basically, his identity is now as an infantryman, and that's his family, and it doesn't even really matter the justification so much. Maybe like a soldier just does what he's told. They say to fight, we fight, and these are my people, and I take care of them to the ultimate. So I guess there really is some aspects of like care for others, and even that, like it's really not about the state or the survival of the state. It seems like for Johnny or for anyone, it's just these are my family, and I take care of them, the soldiers around him, you know. Let's see. There's a couple of really dark scenes back to back that I think are worth noting. The first is when a soldier in basic, he struck the drill sergeant, and he's supposed to be like executed for it basically, but he gets court-martialed, and he's gonna get lashes, 5 lashes. That's the standard punishment in this society: corporal punishment, public lashing. It says that the main character passes out like after the second or third lash, and so did a few other people. And basically, it's these young people being shocked by this violence, very visceral violence. And I think also being shocked because Johnny talks about like, what if it's me next? How am I going to slip up in a moment of passion where it's going to be me getting lashes and getting a dishonorable discharge? So I think he and others are shocked not just by the violence, but by the state wielding that violence. Okay, right after this scene, a former member of their training group who had ran away basically from basic is found to have kidnapped and unalived a little girl. And he's caught, and he's sent back to the training unit to be punished. And he's going to be executed for this crime. And everyone witnesses it. It seems like the reaction is totally different. No one's like, it's not like he's made sick by it. Instead, he has this internal dialogue about, is that just? I don't even remember what the phrase is it for, but basically is like execution for a crime a just punishment? And the novel, he basically concludes, yes, it is, but it's kind of sad and kind of interesting, the argument he has with himself about that. So yeah, those are kind of heavy, but let's say the last one that was really touching to me is toward the end of the novel. He is leaving the Roger Young, the ship he's been on. He's leaving the ship to go to officer training school, and on his way making that transition, someone comes up behind him and taps him on the shoulder, and he turns around, and it is his father, who he hasn't spoken to since he went into the military. His dad kind of cut off communication. And it's his dad, taps him on the shoulder. His dad's in uniform. His dad enlisted and got assigned to the ship that he was just leaving off of. And they just have this great reunion and, gain some like understanding of each other. And even though they're missing each other, like ships in the night, because he's going off to training and he may not end up back on that ship. And there's a war on, so you don't really know what's going to happen to either of them. But so that was just like a really touching scene. Okay, yeah, and I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the book right now. Thank you so much for being here for the first video. And look forward to whatever's going to happen next, whatever the next book is that I'll want to go in depth on, or any other fun, longer content here on YouTube. We'll see. Again, Starship Troopers, I highly recommend. I'd say go in, with a thinking mind, a critical mind. But it really hooked me, and, I almost couldn't put it down. Okay, I love you guys. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time.